looks like Chad is like in the back room, which is pretty hilarious because he's trying so hard to get in. I wanted to like help him, and like I kind of ruined. I mean, it could have been cool because it could have been just like the song going, but I kind of thought it'd be more interesting to know what we're going through, personally. How you doing, Dave? Good to see you.
Yeah, good. How are you?
I'm pretty stoked. So I've been listening to your book. So
Good.
I have it like where did I just put it? Put it down somewhere, whatever. But like while I was reading the book, there's a QR codes in your book. This is embarrassing. Why don't you pull up your copy of it? Where'd I put it?
I'm in my work office that I'm slowly
Are we
disassembling.
both not having a copy of your book? That's hilarious. That's hilarious. But the point is, like, it's now in the ether. It's like the Holy Spirit because like there's a
Yes,
QR code in like
correct.
the book, and then all of a sudden you can. I was like, I don't know when I'm gonna have time to be reading this book because I'm like going back and forth, driving around, picking up stuff and all this stuff. Boom, listening to it all the time. I'm halfway through it, which is
Awesome.
awesome. Yeah,
Awesome.
and it's you reading it, which is
And it's
super
me.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
The
that's like the
advantage is
best possible.
I know how at least I think the names are pronounced.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, and you can like bring in like the anecdotes. You're like, yeah, and then I went to this Mexican restaurant, and then like that got me to read Nephi, which I thought was pretty good. That was pretty good. But yeah, no, I thought we could like continue on where we'd kind of been going. We talked a bit about the Seraph before, and we've
Cool.
talked about Nephi. I mean, you can go as hard as you want to go, really, wherever direction.
Cool. That's awesome. Man, I'm happy to talk about the book. That is great. So let me tell you the background. Here's the real background, Andreas. The real background is that I am a weirdo. Okay. So this subtitle of this story is "What Kind of Weirdo is Dave?" So Dave is the kind of weirdo who got a degree in Near Eastern Studies, but then decided to go to law school because he wanted to get married. Then he stuck it out through law school, even though he didn't like it and he wasn't any good at it. And so I would do this. My law school classmates would laugh their asses off at me because we had a locker, okay, and in the library. So I would go to the gym and I would play pickup basketball. I had this amazing pickup basketball game for 3 years. It was so great. And this was the one time in my life I was like fit and I could dunk. Okay. I'm 6'7". For like 3 years, I could dunk. So it was great. And then I'd go to the library, and to avoid doing law school study, I had in my locker a stack of books on, I kid you not, 10 different languages. Okay. So Dave is a weirdo who loves languages. And this is
Just
when
want to distract yourself as much as possible from memorizing law. That's fair.
it felt more important to me than torts or bankruptcy or
Totally.
whatever. So, and what is it? I'll see if I can remember the 10 that at the time I was studying. Definitely Italian, Old English, Classical Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Welsh, Sanskrit, Arabic, and I'm forgetting one, something else.
The Greek in there, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. If I didn't say Greek, the one I'm missing is Greek. So, you should not mistake me for saying that I'm good at any of these, right? One of the things I said backstage was that I'm good at nothing. I am a specialist in zero things. That is why I'm a science fiction writer. So, but I'm a weirdly distributed generalist. And so in law school, I was doing these languages. And then I went to London and New York for 6 years and rode trains for 2 hours a day. And I kept looking at this ancient stuff and looking at not so much the Bible, but the books around the Bible. Okay. So the intertestamental literature, or the apocalyptic literature, and these are overlapping categories, right? The Nag Hammadi library, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of these are like collections of books found in a place. Some of them are genres. Some of them are time periods. But books that looked like they should have been in the Bible and didn't make it. And I got really interested in these. And one of the features that is pretty common in this literature, okay, is so-called heavenly ascent literature, which is stories of people going to heaven. And maybe the oldest is Isaiah 6, maybe. okay, that we have. And this is one of the chapters that this is the chapter where we commonly say Isaiah is called to be a prophet. Okay, he sees the Lord on his throne with his train or his skirts filling the temple, and a seraph comes forward and puts a hot coal on Isaiah's mouth, and that heals him of his sin, and he's called to be a prophet. We talked about this, I think, on one of our earlier sessions, right? Daniel also is an ascent text. Daniel sees the Ancient of Days on a throne. Maybe Ezekiel 1 with the sort of the strange beasts and the wheel and a wheel. And the thing about these heavenly ascent texts is what they seem to be conceptualized as happening inside the Jerusalem temple. Okay, so they're not described as. Isaiah does say, I was in the temple," but Daniel doesn't, and Ezekiel doesn't, and First Enoch 15 and 16 doesn't, and Third Enoch is an ascent text, and the texts generally don't say they're in a temple, but then they seem to be, because what they're describing is the layout of the temple. First Enoch ascends through a series of 3 houses, and the Jerusalem temple is a series of 3 rooms, which are each, in fact, described in Kings as a house. Okay. And Apocalypse of Abraham is a great one. Chad is somewhere and he can see us. Awesome.
What's up, Chad? You made it.
Yeah.
Crashing in. Okay.
Yeah, I was at dinner getting tacos, wouldn't let me in. But yeah, I'm not sure what we're talking about. We're talking about temple text, right?
Yeah.
So I was actually reading Apocalypse of Abraham recently, and there is that very clear pattern of Azazel, or Satan, falling from grace, losing his garments of glory, which is the same as Satan losing his wings, and then the humans who ascend and go through this endowment process, gaining the garments of glory.
Right. I was gonna ask Dave also, like, because you said like Isaiah is like the earlier one. What is like Enoch different? Like, would you say like Enoch ascends and goes to heaven? Is that earlier? Is it?
It's pretty early. So I think scholars would say that the first. So Enoch is 6 books, one of which has mostly been overwritten, and they're all stuck together. They're sometimes called the Enochic Pentateuch, and they get their own name. So the oldest part of Enoch is probably the Book of the Watchers, which I want to say is the first 36 chapters, First Enoch 1 to 36, which is basically this. It's the sort of easiest part to read because it's a straightforward story. Okay, and the story is now depending on what you think. Okay. The sort of mainstream view is it's an expansion of the story of Genesis 6, where the sons of God, i.e. angels, sleep with mortal women, share secrets they're not supposed to, and this is the sin that causes God to whack earth with the flood. Okay, and so the standard view is this is expanded into the Book of the Watchers, but there are people who argue that Book of the Watchers is recording the older and original myth story from the first temple, and that Genesis 6 is just a part that remained when the rest was taken out. Okay. But the basic story is these angels have sinned. There's actually Enoch probably is collecting various texts like a lot of Bible books are, and so there's actually 2 different versions of the rebellion which have 2 different leaders. One says Azazel is the leader, and the other says Semiaz is the leader.
Right.
And they have 2 different lists of angel names. Okay. So, but the basic story is these angels have sinned, and they want Enoch to intercede on their behalf with God. Well, where do you find God? Well, he's in heaven. So Enoch has to go to heaven to plead for the fallen angels, right? Which, by the way, speaking as a science fiction fantasy writer, what a cool story.
Right. Yeah. I mean, God, it's unbeatable still.
Yes. So what is heaven? Well, it turns out heaven is the temple. And this is actually one of the basic, when you're looking at ascent literature, this is one of the basic correspondences. This is when you see something that's said to take place in heaven or on a mountain. You got to ask yourself the question, is this really heaven or a mountain? Or is this actually the temple that I'm being shown? And Enoch has a 3-part ascent, as there are 3 rooms in the Jerusalem temple. And in the uppermost room is God sitting on his throne, and Enoch presents his petition. Okay. And there are like all these, because we know so little about the Jerusalem temple, it's fascinating to read Enoch 15, first Enoch 15 and 16, I'm pretty sure the chapters, maybe 14 and 15, something like that. And, he's describing all these sort of weather phenomena, like, then there was a hail of ice, or there's a wall of fire, and we don't know what the inside of the temple really looked like. And so it's interesting to think that maybe this is capturing some detail of the architecture or decoration that is lost to us. So yeah, this is probably a fairly early one. I think the Book of the Watchers is the oldest part of Enoch, and so I think this is probably 3rd century BC. I could be wrong on that, but something in that ballpark. And again, some people think, this is a minority view for sure, although I incline this way. Some people think that the story is older, regardless of when this was written. That the story is recording a story that was important in the to some groups around the first temple before the Babylonian captivity. So, but I got interested in this. So, of course, I love Enoch. By the way, the other parts of Enoch are weirder. So, the Book of the Watchers is basically a story, but there are 2 different apocalypses. Okay, so there's the apocalypse of weeks, which tells the history of Israel in a series of statements about there was the first week and this happened, there was the second week and this happened. And like apocalypses normally go, it's supposed to be being told by Enoch at the beginning of time, right? But really, the author is sitting where he thinks near the end of time. So really, the vision is like 80% history, and then he gets up to the last week, and that's his actual prophecy, right? So even though the whole thing is supposed to be prophecy by Enoch way back when. Of course, part of that idea, why do I say Enoch wrote it instead of me, Joe Israelite? Well, because no one knows Joe Israelite, but if I say Enoch wrote it, then people might read it, right? So this is the source of one of the sources of the phenomenon of pseudepigraphy, writing books in someone else's name. The ancients didn't have an idea of intellectual property. No one got royalties for this stuff.
It worked for the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So hey,
well, look. The Book of Deuteronomy was not written by Moses. Like people like the medieval rabbi. This is the very first step in critical biblical scholarship, and I forget his name. Is a guy in like the 12th century, I think, is a rabbi, and he says, we say the Book of Moses was written by the Book of Deuteronomy was written by Moses, but since it refers to his death and burial, probably not.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the first step on a long road. So the apocalypse of weeks is interesting because, one of the things, this is a little tangent just about why Enoch is awesome, and you should all read First Enoch. It's from the point of view of somebody who is upset and think that the Jerusalem temple has gone apostate.
Oh. Yeah.
Because in the period of the, I forget what week it is. I think it might be the 7th week. That seems to correspond to basically the time of Josiah. It describes, oh man, I'm forgetting the language. Chad will probably correct me. I gotta look it up. I think it talks about their bread was impure and they lost wisdom or something. Man, it's been too long. The point is, there's this apocalypse. It's a history of Israel divided into weeks, and whatever the detail is exactly they use. This is somebody who, writing maybe in like 300 BC, thought, hey, back in about 700 BC, they really messed up, and they went wrong. There's also an animal apocalypse. There's a whole second apocalypse in there. Again, a history of Israel plus a prophecy of the end. It's called the animal apocalypse because everybody is an animal, Like I think Moses a white. I think Moses is like a black ram. King David is a white bull or something. Except for there are a couple of characters who become men, which is interesting because in the symbolic vocabulary, it seems to be the meaning of becoming a man seems to mean becoming divine, becoming angelic. So there's also a calendar text in Enoch, right? So it's a big, complicated document. On top of all of the sexy things I've already said about Enoch, Jude quotes Enoch. Okay, Jude undoubtedly, unequivocally quotes from the Ethiopic Apocalypse of Enoch. I want to say verse 6 or verse 8 or something. Jude, who was traditionally thought to be from the family of Jesus. Right. So like, read Jude and James, you're like, man, this is about as close as we can get to actually the man Jesus, son of Joseph, as we can get, right? And the dude's quoting Enoch. It may also be quoted in the Gospels. It may also be the source of the title, the Son of Man, which Son of Man appears in the Old Testament where it just seems to mean man. But in the New Testament, it seems to be sort of a title, a special title. It means something more than man. It means like this. It means Messiah. It means the Son of God somehow.
Yeah. Well, but actually, can you guys hear me? It's kind of lagging.
Yes.
Okay, so on the Son of Man thing, I was researching. So going back to the idea of the Son of Man, Margaret Barker was tracing that passage in Daniel back to the older theology of El Elyon and Yahweh, and how all across the cultures they had this image of the second level of the pantheon, whether it was Yahweh or Baal or someone ascending up to that higher level, and that's where the idea of the Son of Man came from. And it was sort of a remnant of this older religion.
Answering a quick question in the chat. Yes, there is Hebrew before the 3rd century BC. We have written Hebrew text, the Ketef Hinnom scrolls, which are actually written on silver plates. Make of that what you will. Our text from the book of Numbers, including the priestly blessing in, Numbers 25? Man, I forget what chapter the priestly blessing is in Hebrew. So Hebrew is at least that old. We're pretty confident. It's probably older than that. So,
of course, it looked different though. The writing style was different, but
So the so-called square Babylonian letters that we use now come in, I think, about 300 BC. Actually, don't they? I think that's about the time when we start seeing them being used, or give or take a century or two.
Yeah.
Those are your older style letters right there. That's an image of the Ketef Hinnom scroll, one of them, and a transcription of the characters.
Right.
So the ones on the left are so-called Paleo Hebrew, and the ones on the right that you saw there a minute ago are the square letters, which are basically what you see now in a newspaper in Israel or in a Hebrew Bible, right, if you picked it up.
Modern.
The same type of writing on the Back Creek Stone from Tennessee.
Yeah, I do. I'm not an expert in the Back Creek stones or any of that stuff, but some people think are very convinced that Hebrew has been found on various inscriptions in this continent. Yes, I don't know it very well.
Well, it's interesting even looking at the Japanese.
The two most convincing writings that could be sort of Nephite I've seen is one of them is the Back Creek Stone, because it was literally found on a controlled Smithsonian dig, and they only tried to debunk it after they realized it was Hebrew like 15 years later. And then there's this other thing in New Mexico, I believe. It's not like a modern form of Hebrew. It's called Old Negav, I think it's called, where it's sort of like an Egyptian form of Hebrew. And they dated it to being at least around, I think, 300 BC, based on how weathered the carvings were on this wall in this random canyon in New Mexico. It's interesting that sort of an Egyptian form of Hebrew, because it's very similar to the idea of Reformed Egyptian.
That's interesting. Is that a reference to the Negev desert? Is the name a reference to the Negev? Because I think there's been some.
Yes.
Man, we're like,
Yes.
this was not the story I set out to tell, Andreas. So I'm like not prepared for this stuff. But I'm pretty sure there are some like sort of Egyptian / Israelite sites in the Negev that may be like mining sites where they found forms of writing that are sort of a combination of the two. I'd have to go.
One I like is
I think that would be the whole Nagav writing. It's
Japan.
very interesting. So I was showing my friend this documentary from History Channel about like potential Hebrew artifacts in the New World. That was one of them. It was like, but they're like, this is way too old to be from the Lost Tribes. This old Nagav writing was used way earlier. And it's like, okay, that could either be the Lehites using Reformed Egyptian, or it could be like the Jaredites writing, because we don't know what their writing was. But it's very interesting because the translation said about veiled or covered, and a darkness upon us and all this stuff. It's like that sounds very temple-esque.
There was this good one also in Japan where the Japanese royal regalia of the emperor is this like jelly bean and the shield and this sword, right?
Can you guys hear me? Am I lagging out?
Yeah, your thing is starting to break a bit, but I hear you. Yeah, but the sword here doesn't look very Japanese, and the mirror is written in ancient Hebrew, which is pretty interesting. So
and it says Ehye, Sher Ehye.
Yeah.
Dude, that is amazing.
Yeah.
So that's I am that I am. That's what the voice in the burning bush says to Moses to identify. Scholars
pretty weird thing to find on a Japanese emperor's shield. Yeah, I mean,
it is. Having said that, oh man, there's things I can't tell you. Weird stuff has been found in weird places. Let me say that. Weird stuff has been found. Weird religious artifacts have been found in the tombs of Chinese emperors.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, okay. So we've lost Chad. Let me resume.
He'll be back, I'm sure. Yeah.
We may eventually get to in the language of Adam. So, which is fine. Look, this is all interesting conversation. I became, so I'm also Mormon. Some of you have figured this out about me. And I'm a fan of the Book of Mormon. I'm one of those kinds of guys. And I became convinced as I was doing this reading that the Book of Mormon contains temple texts. Okay. But I became convinced first on a sort of a right brain basis. Like, man, I can feel it. Like there are data that are being correlated in my unconscious mind, but I can't quite figure it out in my conscious mind yet. So I'd read the book and be like, man, what am I not seeing? Why does it feel to me like some of these are temple texts? And why can I not put my finger on it? And basically I was in that state for years. Well, I'll tell you the full story. Here we are. We usually go like 2 hours, right? So, and I'm going to use inside baseball Mormon-y sounding language because we're friends. So, I'm sitting at my house on a Sunday afternoon, and the first and second counselors, newly called first and second counselors of the Elders Quorum presidency, ring the doorbell. And they give me my new home teaching assignment. And I say, thank you. And then they don't go away. And they're kind of hanging out at my door. And we're not really especially friends. They're nice guys, but like we would never hang out or anything. So I don't know why they're still kind of at my door. And I say, hey, you guys must have something else you want to talk about. And they say, yes. And I say, okay. What is it? And they say, well, we want to extend a calling to you. And I say, okay, well, I will, it has to be Elders Quorum instructor because you guys all just got called. So there's a brand new presidency. You're looking for an Elders Quorum teacher. I said, I'll do it. I said, but you have to know this. I said, here's the deal. One, you will never have to remind me. I will be prepared every week. And two, I will never teach out of the manual. and because there's a manual of lessons, you know. And and they said, well, will you use the manual as a resource to get some, you know, quotes or things? And I said, no. And they said, will you use the manual to, you know, to pick subjects? And I said, you should assume I will not open the manual. And they said, let us think about it. And
they went home and they watched the Dead Poets Society and got back to you. Yeah.
And well, apparently what they did is Steve. Oh shoot, I'm blanking on his last name. The Elders Quorum president went golfing with his dad and said, what do I do with this guy? And his dad said, give it a shot. Why not? You can always release him if he's a problem, right? You'll find out soon enough.
Exactly.
So then I basically gave me a forum where for 10 years in 4 different congregations, I taught on elders quorums, and I worked out this stuff on my feet. Having an obligation to have to talk about things made it start coming together for me. And so here's the basic argument. Okay. I'm like fast forwarding now 12 years. We are multiplying. Fantastic. So, here's the basic argument that I've made now in three books and multiple YouTube appearances and firesides and whatever. So the Book of Mormon is written by people who practice the heavenly ascent. And this is not a purely visionary experience. It is a temple liturgy. So the men, because as far as we can tell, it's all the writings we have are all from men. Okay. The men who did this ascended through the 3 stages of temples built after the manner of Solomon's temple, is what Nephi tells us in 2 Nephi 5, into the presence of God. And they understood it as a circular journey. They understood it with a mythology, which was they were Adam and Eve having suffered the expulsion from Eden. They were now returning to Eden. And they assume that the audience has had the same experience, and they are talking to fellow initiates. And so this is the repeated in the Gospels over and over again. You get, who has ears, let him hear. Ho echon ota akueto is Greek, okay, which is thought to indicate, this is a mystery doctrine. Here's a secret doctrine. If you were initiated, you would understand what Jesus was talking about or what the evangelist was trying to get at. Well, the Book of Mormon writers never say that, but they constantly use what is discernibly, identifiably, systematically, consistently the images, the architecture, the sights and sounds, and even the tastes, the repeated words, ritual gestures, the mythology of that ritual experience to talk to their audience. And so if we can the more we can figure out what it was they did and what they thought they were doing, the more we understand the Book of Mormon. That's my thesis. That's what In the Language of Adam is all about.
Right on. And so from there, you're saying, the experience isn't just to be, to make a world a better place and to be nice to everybody, but it's literally exaltation. Like, it's to experience like Enochian, fulfillment of what it means to be like a complete being.
Yeah. That's correct. It's to become one of the gods, or the way the Sermon on the Mount puts it, it's to become one of the shining ones. It's to become like a lamp not hid under a bushel. It's to become like one of the lights on the menorah that you are approaching. This is going back to the Ketef Hinnom scrolls. The Ketef Hinnom scrolls is the priestly blessing. It's an invocation. May Yahweh cause his face to shine upon you, because the gods shine. And Matthew says, and Alma echoes him, the righteous shine in the kingdom of God. Well, the kingdom of God is the place where God's throne is. God's throne is the Ark of the Covenant. It's the chariot. It sits in the Holy of Holies. In the kingdom of God, the righteous, those who ascend to enter in there, become gods, and they too shine. And that is the That is the experience. Now, by the way, the level at which I have recovered it, so far, is really still very superficial, because I think there are all kinds of levels of, man, I think these guys thought they were acquiring spiritual powers. They tell stories about making mountains move, and great healings, and the causing of earthquakes that shatter prisons. And I think we should take seriously the idea that they believe these are the sorts of things that they were, abilities they were gaining, right? Like spiritual powers they could unleash on the world as a result of their systematic spiritual application to this discipline of the heavenly ascent. Yeah.
Hi, Professor Haynes.
Yes, we have not met. Hi, I'm Dave.
Hey, I'm Tyler Hines. I'm from Illinois. I pop on the show from time to time.
Cool.
I go by Professor Hines. It's the Dutch spelling of my name. I come out of the Reorganized Church, actually, originally. And it's interesting that you speak of spiritual gifts in connection with this heavenly ascent, because our two traditions, in the Reorganized Church, the Kirtland era was always emphasized more than the Nauvoo era.
Mm-hmm.
And endowment during the Kirtland era was often, it hadn't evolved into the ceremony yet, and endowment was often associated with the endowment of spiritual gifts. That's how the terminology was used at the time. And it's interesting how that evolved into an actual ceremony of ascent. So it's a connection that I'm drawing in my mind listening to you. Right? Very cool stuff.
That's super interesting. Rob K, I think I can hear. This is a reveal. This is a revelation. So one of the things that's happened is that the book's done great. By the way, we sold 2,000 copies in May. Okay, so it's pretty based. It's going gangbusters, which is amazing because it's on such a weird subject. But okay, awesome. So we're launching a publishing company in the back of it. So I'm actually editor-in-chief of Plain and Precious Publishing, a publishing company which exists and currently has one book. But we have two that will come out this fall. Probably also my other two back catalog. By December, we'll have 5 books out, I think. And there are other people who are working on books for us. One of them is a fellow named Rob K, who has a YouTube channel called Mormon Yeshiva, which is pretty great. And his take on the Book of Mormon and Professor Hines, this is one of the things I was sort of alluding to, is he says, so he's a super interesting dude. He's raised his maternal grandfather as I think this is correct, a Methodist preacher, but his father was a Jew. The name K was originally Kahan. It was the Polish or Lithuanian Cohen. Okay. So he's basically raised Jewish. He finds a Book of Mormon in the library when he's 15. He has no idea there are churches that go with it. Okay. He reads it. He's like, look at this amazing Jewish book. This book is so Jewish. What a great book. And specifically, okay, and this is what his book is going to be about. And I am so excited for this. Okay. He argues that he doesn't use the term mysticism. He talks about prophetic science. Okay. But he argues that the Book of Mormon is a Jewish mystical text, that when it has numbers and some of the sort of unique one-off weird words that appear in there, like the name Sebus, the waters of Sebus is an example. I think he'll have a couple chapters on in his book. He says, look, what these are is actual roadmaps, meditation texts. They're actually, this is not an abstract doctrinal manual or a story collection. It is a practical manual for meditating to gain spiritual power. And spiritual does not mean not literal, right? Like you might just say power, to gain power, to do stuff, right? So we're going to publish next year a book about the Book of Mormon as a manual for meditation to gaining spiritual power. And I am quite freaking excited about that.
Yeah, that sounns awesome. That's
Here's
really cool.
Something I thought I have on that. So I think these things are all very connected, right? When we talk about the plain and precious things removed. So Ezra Taft Benson, he's my favorite prophet besides Joseph Smith.
I'm
And
trying
Ezra
so
Taft,
hard to understand you, Chad. Like, maybe roll up
can
your
you hear me?
window.
Can you hear me now?
I heard you say you like Ezra Taft Benson.
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, so Ezra
I like
Taft
it.
Benson talks about the Latter-day Church being under condemnation for not taking the Book of Mormon seriously, right? So when we talk about, Third Nephi talks about
Chad. Chad. You there?
you hear me?
I have no idea, bro. It's really hard because you're driving and I hear only the car driving. Oh well. Maybe try again, or maybe text it. If write in the private chat, then I'll read it, or Dave can read it because he's got that eloquent like narrator voice. I don't know. You could kind of go on what you were saying though. Can you kind of riff on that, like on what you thought you heard you say?
Here we go. Here I'll do. I'll do a good narrator. Ezra Taft Benson said the Latter-day Church is under condemnation for rejecting the true purpose of the Book of Mormon. Look, man, I think that
Good job.
Moroni says that. Man, Mormon 8 is the most terrifying chapter in the book in all of Scripture, and we like never talk about it, or we talk about it really glibly. But here's what it says: "Hey, you reading the book, you bunch of perverts and sinners! You're desecrating the church of God. Repent, or you're going to hell." Who do we think that's a message for?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who do we think that's a message for? Yeah, I think we remain under condemnation for not taking the Book of Mormon seriously. Or put it this way, okay? Here's how I think about this. I'm old now. You guys are all sprightly and young. I'm an old man. I'm 51. I was a kid. When I was a kid, we were worried the Russians were going to bomb us with nuclear weapons, an obviously ludicrous proposition. We were told, okay, when I was a kid, it seemed like a long time ago. Hey, there's more to this book. You know, you get on top of what you got, you figure this part out, and there's more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, where's the more, Chad? It's been 195 years now. Where is the more? Well, apparently we have not mastered the book we have, right? And I am uncomfortable with that.
Chad says, "Oh, you want to read Chad's next thing?"
I was going to do the narrator voice again.
Do it.
Okay. Sorry to monopolize though. Okay, but I'm going to read it anyway. The purpose of the Book of Mormon is both to teach the remnants of Israel that Christ was always known about and about the esoteric doctrines, such as the second comforter. If the prophets' mouths are shut and miracles cease, it is because of our lack of faith. It's a testament. The mystical stuff is real. The Gentiles will reject the fullness of the gospel.
That second part was real Chad. You could feel it. I feel like that the more you look at, like, you know, Jesuit nation method, spiritual exercises, right? Like there's a whole process there of mysticism, which you're supposed to get into your imagination, imagine with your eyes, imagine seeing, imagine with your ears, imagine hearing, and imagine with your heart, like things being felt. And I think that's something that is kind of missing in like the Latter-day tradition. There should be more meditation put into imagine yourself in the scenarios of each of the Book of Mormon stories, right? Or particularly even like the Book of Abraham, I think would be good meditation for a lot of kids. Like imagine being that character in that moment. And I think we do that to an extent, like with plays and realization, but people don't look at the symbology, like you're saying, like the numerology or
What's so interesting is when you talk about that and you think about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon and the descriptions we have of that, and even the descriptions we have of the coming forth of Revelation, like if it's Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith on stage in front of a crowd and there's collective revelation taking place or something like that, you can almost read back into that stuff and see parallels with meditative exercise And I've always kind of wondered if that is a means by which we do tap into the spiritual realm, and kind of that veil that comes up between us and the spiritual realm is becomes thinner. I have always wondered that, and I see a lot of parallels. I remember I went to a Methodist college when I was younger, and I had a minister there, and he was talking about Jesuits and Catholic priests and the construction of memory palaces and things of that nature. And I kept going back to things I had heard about Joseph Smith over the years and things like that. I'm like, a lot of this sounds really familiar.
Yeah, it's useful. I wouldn't throw that all away either.
Yeah. It's yeah, that's really interesting. So this is maybe a tangent, or maybe this is exploring the same idea a little further. But like one of the passages, a series of passages I talk about in the language of Adam. And Andreas, I don't think you've gotten here yet because I talk about it in connection with Nahum in chapter 9, probably. Is the missions of Ammon and then Aaron in what is this, like chapter 18 to 22 or something of the book of Alma. You get this series of people who faint and then rise to their feet, announcing that they have seen Jesus, and it's actually more formulaic than that, because if you read the stuff that Ammon teaches King Lamoni, I'm not looking at, but it's I think it's the creation of the world, including the creation of Adam, the fall, and the plan of redemption. And then when Aaron teaches Lamoni's father, like 3 chapters later, it's exactly the same 4 things. So there's like a set of teachings that are given, and then there's a ritual cry for mercy. So Lamoni and his wife and the king all cry out for mercy. They don't use exactly the same words, but they all cry for mercy, and they all pass out. And then they all come up, and I think that 2 of them specifically say, "I have seen Jesus," and I think the king's father doesn't say that, but immediately starts telling everyone they have to worship Jesus. So maybe it's implied, right? And by the way, Alma's description of his experience, his conversion experience, follows a lot of the same stuff. A cry for mercy, passing out, right? And so, like, the question is, like, why, right? Is it that there's like this wave of sort of Pentecostal, a collective, I don't want to say hysteria, because but like, is it like
knock you out?
Holy Spirit experience? Or, and here's what I think the answer is it's ritual. I think if you hear that once or twice, then what you're talking about is someone has an ecstatic experience. People do this, right? They get worked up, they pass out. But where it's over and over again with the same constellation of things, I think what you're seeing is ritual, is an ordinance. And that's one example of, it's a 300-page book, right? Of I think that the Nephite prophets show us again and again, this is how we worship, and their assumption is that we do. Now, by the way, Professor, so interestingly, right, a couple consequences kind of connect to, you're being from a Community of Christ or an RLDS kind of background. One, the way that the LDS talk about sort of Joseph's revelation is in these kind of staccato bursts, and there's sort of like the Book of Mormon revelation, and then like there's the temple revelation, which comes later. Okay. And I don't think that's it at all. I think the temple revelation is included in the Book of Mormon. I think from the beginning, it's all in there. But the other thing is, there's this interesting risk we run. One of the sort of things that writers' arguments that sent me down this path is a book by a guy named Jack Welch. He's LDS. He's actually a tax lawyer, but he's written some stuff about the Book of Mormon, a number of pretty cool things. He's the guy who discovered chiasmus in the Book of Mormon. It's like maybe the most famous thing. Okay. He also wrote a book about how the Sermon on the Mount is a liturgical text, how the Sermon on the Mount can basically be acted out. Okay. And I read that and I was like, didn't think much about it. And like, it just like went to sleep somewhere down in the sediment in my brain, right, for 10 years before I really twigged what he was talking about. But what Jack's implied argument is, I think, now Jack's going to get mad at me and send me nasty emails. He won't even watch. Sorry. Is, hey, the Sermon on the Mount is the LDS endowment. Like, he uses language to try and lead you to that conclusion. I think there's a risk of eisegesis when we do that.
Of course.
And in other words, I think that what the Nephites did is something like the LDS endowment, but not the same thing. And if we're trying to impose too much our categories on it, we kind of have to start with whatever our set of experiences is, right? I mean, if I were Cutler Wright, those are the guys that have, like, there's 8 of them left and they claim to have the original novel.
Can you imagine a guy like in the temples putting in light bulbs, like the LEDs, and he looks at his friend, he's like, is this period? Do you think we're all right? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. If I were a Cutler Wright, I would have to start from imposing my Cutler Wright endowment on it, right? Like, that's what you start with. But but to see what the Nephites are really talking about, you have to get beyond. You have to eventually go, oh, wait. But there's stuff in here that is different from, right? Similar to, thematically consistent with, but really different. Like if you or I was dropped, if we knew the LDS endowment and were dropped into the experience Nephi had, I think we would actually get really upset when they started physically hitting us. I think that would be like, wait a minute, what are you doing? Right?
Full karate training. You gotta go through the whole thing.
7 punches in the face is, I think, actually what it was.
Wow,
so
really?
Yeah. I don't think you've got to that chapter yet either.
It's the Black Eye Club. Okay, good to know.
Yeah, we could talk about that as a specific example. But yes, I think they punched you 7 times in the face. Or punched you 7 times.
What a club.
Yeah. So so there's this interesting, like, your perspective. I'd be interested. You may not have read. I'm going to assume you have not read the book, but if you did, I'd be interested in your perspective, not coming at it maybe with the assumptions that an LDS reader will. Because an LDS reader, I think, quickly sees, this is what he's talking about, but may assume too much.
I'm somewhat familiar with the LDS endowment. I've never gone through it, and there's parts of it I just don't know about. But from everything that's ever been told to me, I suppose I would say that I agree. There's nothing that's ever been told with me that I don't agree with as a general principle theologically, really.
Yeah.
But the actual ceremony, I've never gone through anything like that. So I could probably come at it from a perspective that, like, if you were to go look at, like, whatever the Nephite, the endowment would be versus the LDS endowment, I suppose I would kind of come at it from, like, are the same, I guess, kind of perennial principles popping up in both, and are they being relayed ritualistically to the initiates in such a way that they get that essential gospel knowledge? And I think that can look different in different contexts, and that's probably because I come from Community of Christ and I have more of that broader minded view that I would just see it that way. But I can see parallels between our belief system and ancient Judaism, mystical Islam, other versions of Christianity. So I kind of view the gospel as the religion that's written on the hearts of all men. And I think you're going to kind of see the same themes pop up everywhere where true principles are being taught. It's just going to look different on the cultural context, is what I'd say.
I hear that, but the book is really not even about those themes, right? This is, let me give you an example from the Book of Mormon. Okay. Let's look at 2 Nephi 1. So the context here, Lehi is old. He'll be dead before chapter 4. Okay. And so he's talking to his sons. And I want you to look at the language he uses to exhort. This is all of the sons assembled, but look especially at verses 13, 14, and 15. Okay. And then we'll maybe talk about them in reverse. 13, I'll use my Chad narrating voice. Oh, that you would awake. This is Lehi to his sons. Awake from a deep sleep, yea, even from the sleep of hell, and shake off the awful chains by which ye are bound, which are the chains which bind the children of men, that they are carried away captive down to the eternal gulf of misery and woe. Awake and arise from the dust, and hear the words of a trembling parent, whose limbs ye must soon lay down in a cold and silent grave, from whence no traveler can return. A few more days, and I go the way of all the earth. But behold, the Lord hath redeemed my soul from hell. I have beheld his glory, and I am encircled about eternally in the arms of his love. Now, this is all ordinance language. And it's not the theology of it. It's not the morality of it. It's the actions. Because in verse 15, Lehi, who is about to die, is encircled about in God's arms. Okay. Now, from numerous other passages, including in 1 Nephi 8, but also I look at some of the New Testament, some Old Testament too. John 1 is a great example. Jacob 9. It is clear this ordinance near the climax, part of what you do is you pass through a straight and narrow gate where you meet the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. He employs no keeper there. Okay. And he recognizes you because this is Jacob 9:41, or 2 Nephi 9:41, Jacob speaking. He recognizes you because his name is the Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, and there is an embrace. And so in 2 Nephi 1:15, Lehi, who is transitioning to his eternal reward, he is dying. Okay. What the image he gives to that is he is standing at the threshold to the kingdom of God, and he is embraced. He is embraced, locked in an embrace with God. Now, what about his sons? Well, you go back to the two prior verses. Okay. And what is he urging them to do? Awake and arise from the dust. Who are they? They are someone who lay sleeping in the dust. Oh, that's Adam. That's Genesis 2. They are Adam. Oh, and look, he says, in fact, what he says, I think this is actually verse 23 or 25. He says, arise and be, he repeats the awake and arise and says, arise and be men. There it is. Come forth out. Nope, that's not the, somewhere in here he says, oh, no, it's verse 21 above. Yeah, there it is. Arise from the dust and be men. They're Adam. And they're Adam in this ritual about the expulsion from and the return to the Garden of Eden. And he's saying, you are like Adam, asleep. You are formless. You are dust. Awake and arise. Look at verse 22. Put on the armor of righteousness. Get dressed. These are ritual actions. Awake, stand up, put on the clothing, put on the armor of righteousness. Now all of that to an LDS endowed person is like, maybe someone in the audience right now is going, what? And the lights are going on for the first time. But here's where we get to a difference. Shake off the chains with which ye are bound. Now, this idea that the initiate is wrapped in chains runs throughout the Book of Mormon. Satan puts chains on you. They're the chains that he uses to drag you. In fact, in verse 13, we saw, right? They're the chains that are used to drag you to the eternal gulf of misery and woe. Now, this is from Matthew 7. But when you are about to enter the straight and narrow gate, there's also a broad gate and a wide way, and that goes to hell. And that's the Book of Mormon talks about this as a gulf, as a filthy river, as a lake of fire and brimstone, right? And so failure in the ascent is that Satan drags you with his chains and you go down that road into that pit, into that fire, right? And so Lehi's exhorting his sons. The image is clearly the ritual. They are sleeping Adam. This is Laman and Lemuel he's talking to, right? Arise, awake, become men, put on the armor of righteousness, and hold on, where is the come forth out of obscurity line? Oh, 23. Come forth out of obscurity. That means darkness. Come out of darkness. You are in the dark center room, the Haykal. Come into the light of the Holy of Holies. And right, it's ordinance language. Now, this is how do we not see this for 195 years? We are dumb is the answer. I was dumb. I am dumb. We are all dumb.
I'm not even
else.
I'm not
So
even a PS member. I'm not
again,
even.
like, can you guys hear
I'm
me? Or?
parallels between what I know of your endowment, and I'm also a member of I'm a master Mason, and I'm seeing a lot of parallels between the Masonic rites that I went through within the 3 degrees.
And I think that should count.
And this is 1829. This is before Joseph knows Masonry, right? So this is
Actually, I mean, it reminds me of, I'm not going to go into everything, but being blindfolded and the general things people know about Masonry, it reminds me of Darkness to the Light, a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one, that. Two, how much poignancy does this add to the passage? Because first of all, what it implies, if we're to take this seriously as like this is a speech Lehi might really have delivered to exhort Laman and Lemuel, that means they understood it. That means you don't talk like this to somebody if you think it's going to go right over their head. He is dying. He is using the strongest plea he can with his two wayward sons, and it is temple language. That means Laman and Lemuel knew enough, right? Knew enough that he would make this plea to them, and they chose not to do it, right? They let him pass through the straight and narrow gate, and they harumphed, and then they tried to kill Nephi again, right? So how poignant is that? By the way, not only is this so powerful for Lehi that this is his dying plea to his wayward sons, it's so powerful for Nephi that when Lehi dies in 2 Nephi 4, in the so-called Psalm of Nephi, Nephi comforts himself using the same language. He asks God to dress him and keep the gate open before him so that he can go in and build upon the rock, all of which is the same ordinance. The rock is the foundation stone in the Holy of Holies in the Temple of Jerusalem. And so Lehi, as temple initiate, uses temple initiation to plead with his sons. Nephi, as temple initiate, consoles himself over the death of his father. So the thing is, this is not an abstract intellectual game, right? First of all, I get no prizes for playing this game. I am not a professor. No one's going to give me tenure. I will never get an honorary degree in my life. I am a science fiction writer, okay? Me talking about this can only hurt my science fiction sales. This is not going to help me. People are like, oh, that guy's he's not only a Mormon, he's a believing Mormon. Don't buy his books, right? So I win no prizes for this. It's not a game. It changes the meaning of the Book of Mormon. When you see this stuff, it changes what the Book of Mormon is talking about. And I don't think it gets to the bottom. I think it's just, this is one layer down. And this is why I'm excited for Rob K's books and also the other amazing books that are being worked on for Plain and Precious Publishing, because we're going to really dig into this Book of Mormon thing.
Yeah,
Well, what do you think
really
about?
good.
Oh, good.
Yeah, when you know what you're looking for. So I sent this to you the other day. I searched for wisdom in the Gospel Library because it's like, okay, that's the Divine Mother's name. And then it's in, I think it was in Ecclesiastes, like chapter 7, maybe. Yeah, so I'm not sure if that's the right chapter, but I searched for wisdom. And immediately it's the scene where it talks about how the first thing that stands out is you need to cherish your wife more than anything. I'm sort of paraphrasing here. And it has this sort of scene of someone being, it says, dressed in white garments and anointed with oil. And then it goes on about wisdom versus strength, how wisdom is more valuable than strength. Right after talking about the wife, and just before that, there's also a scene of them partaking of bread and wine. So it's very clearly a scene from the Holy of Holies temple wedding, where they're being dressed in white garments, they're being anointed with oil. The bread and wine was in the Holy of Holies of the temple as well. And then the idea of wisdom versus strength, it's like talking about how a man who has wisdom will be rejected by other men, but will be greater than them. I can look up what chapter it is real quick.
It's super interesting. So here's like a consequence. And this reconnects Andreas to some of the first conversations you and I even had on this channel, right? So one of the consequences, A, you add meaning to the Book of Mormon, okay. But B, you also get this surprise key to unlock the Old Testament. Because, right, and this is something we've talked about before, the Old Testament has been edited, and it was edited by the winners of a political fight who in 2 Kings 23 show us that they're willing to and feel justified in murdering the people who disagreed with them. And we have their record. Well, in the Book of Mormon, we have the record of the other guys. It's the people that left. Okay, the people that first of all went underground, and Hezekiah smashes the Nehushtan, and I hate it. And the Nephite prophets are like, Nehushtan, that is Jesus. We love Nehushtan. It is amazing. Four times, right? Of the 7 clear references to the Nehushtan in the canon, 4 of them are in the Book of Mormon. So they are the other guys, and this is really unusual in history that we get this complete. It's like it's the idiot. It doesn't. They don't tell us the history. They don't say here's what the real history of Israel was. We disagree with the historical take of Kings. They don't do that. That would be interesting. I would love that. This is why I want the rest of the Book of Mormon. Okay, I want to be like, no, man, actually. Turns out Asa was a pretty bad guy or whatever, right? Like I'm interested in that. But they give us their ideology and they give us their liturgy, right? And it is not the description that the Old Testament gives of what is suppressed, but it lines up with it in a lot of points. So that we go, yeah, this is the point of view that was hated, was what these guys had to say.
Yeah.
It's pretty
It's
interesting.
very interesting.
And I
Even
have
from
always wondered if there was a connection between the variations of Judaism that went underground prior to kind of the rise of Pharisaical Judaism and communities you saw pop up at places like Qumran that have a lot of proto-Christian ideas. And then some of the scrolls that were dug up at Qumran seem to allude to the coming of Jesus. So I've always wondered if there was some kind of a connection between, like you said, the Judaism that was ascendant and then the Judaism that went underground, and then these communities we see that kind of pop up in the years leading up to the coming of Christ.
Well, it's interesting also this idea because we talked earlier about like Satan or whatever this accuser be that's pulling you into the rivers and chaining you, right? And so this idea that you're exalted, you're one with this divine thing is not you're one with everything, because there is a specific thing that you're getting in line with, and you have to be very careful about this other thing, which is this accuser, right? And it seems like it'll pull you into the river of Styx or Cerebus, as you were saying, right?
Yeah. So Professor, have I got a book for you? So the book that we're putting out next, which should be up for pre-order in August. We've gone through 2 rounds of edits. I think it's in presumptively the final draft now. It's called The Key to the Keystone. It's by Jonah Barnes, who is a regular over on the Ward Radio podcast. Okay.
Yeah, I love Jonah.
Yeah. So here's what his book is about. Okay. He says, hey, Book of Mormon shows up in 1829. It says some weird stuff. It sort of seems to imply that there are these sort of Christian ideas among the First Temple Jews. That's crazy. But then, almost entirely after the Book of Mormon, the big exception is First Enoch, by the way, which precedes the Book of Mormon by less than a decade. 1821 is translated in English. Probably, I think maybe the first review in North America might be published by like Parley Pratt or somebody in like 1835. I'm probably off in the details, but that's about right. So, but then there's a flood. We have hundreds of apocryphal. He used the term apocryphal to sort of group all these things together, but pseudepigraphical, Gnostic, Nag Hammadi, Dead Sea Scrolls, all this stuff. Okay, we for a long time we had the Deuterocanon, and once in a while 1 or 2 things, and now there's a ton of them, and they sound like the Book of Mormon. They share some of the Book of Mormon's doctrines. They put New Testament sounding ideas about the garden, about Eve specifically, about Satan, about the Messiah in the mouths of Old Testament prophets. Right?
That's what I'm saying. Sorry.
Well, what's so interesting too is that there appears to have been kind of a move in Judaism later after it started to have to contend with Christianity, and no offense to practicing Jews, I have a lot of respect for them, but it seems that there was kind of a move, especially with the kind of the rise of Talmudic Judaism, against some of these things that sound like the coming forth of Christ, like kind of the removal of this second power within the Godhead, which that's alluded to in Daniel. That's in the mainstream Bible.
Yeah, that's yeah. Have you read Alan Siegel's book, Two Powers in Heaven? Is that the?
I think I have read.
Stuff.
I think I have read books that cited that, but I have not read that book.
Yeah, that's a classic study of that specific idea. Yeah, so so this is what Jonah's book is about, and here's his argument in a nutshell. He says the reason why these things and the Book of Mormon sound the same is because they are all coming from the same kind of cultural waters, which is like the parts of the ancient Israelite religion that the Deuteronomists suppressed, and specifically the brass plates. Because often what you have in the Book of Mormon is before one of these guys, Nephi, Ammon, whatever, before they like announce, before they quote, Zenos or somebody, they'll talk about how they're reading. They'll say, I read the words of the prophet. I have read this, right? Which seems to tell us specifically that where they have these are the brass plates. So where they do that, and then the same idea shows up in like, he looks at 50 books, and 50 books is just scratching the surface, right? But it's like the Greek life of Adam and Eve, the Egyptian life of Adam and Eve, the Book of the Bee, it's like a bunch of stuff, right? I think I only knew 20% of them, and I'm fairly well educated in this stuff. And he says, look, they probably actually either of these books come from people who also have the brass plates. In other words, that version of the Old Testament that was not the Old Testament that's lost to us. Or they might even have been on the brass plates. He makes an argument. Part of the book is an argument of trying to reconstruct what was probably on the brass plates. So that should come out. That should be available for pre-order sometime in August and basically out in September.
Yeah. Epic.
So you're saying that the brass plates had the older Testament?
Yes. So this is right. So Margaret's started her journey with the observation that the New Testament seems to assume books that precede it, but the Old Testament doesn't seem to be it. Right? So what was it? Jonah basically, and I don't think he's consciously, I'm not sure he's read Margaret Barker or not, right? But his journey is kind of like the Book of Mormon assumes books that precede it, and it is clearly not the Old Testament, right? I mean, Zenos, Zenoch, Neum, right? It's not the Old Testament. It's something like the Old Testament. It's not.
Yeah, I do think it's pretty telling that a lot of these things are coming out around the same time. So before I even knew who you were, I saw you on Quick Media. I was all over the Deuteronomist stuff. Like as soon as I started my page, I was posting constantly about it, trying to get as many people to know about it as possible, making memes about King Josiah, hunting down the priests of Melchizedek and all this stuff, because I wanted to try and make it more mainstream. And then coincidentally after that, oh, this Dave Butler guy is coming out with this book in the language of Adam that talks about just that. And all this stuff happening at the same time, I do think that it's God. I do think that the answer to the purpose of the Book of Mormon lies in there. And not just understanding these things, but conceptualizing it, understanding that we are in this story, right? We are part of these rituals and that we need to be these temple initiates as well, right? Yeah. So it's supposed to guide to those things, because if miracles have ceased among us, it's because of our own wickedness and unbelief.
Well, that's another question. Is like, how concerned are you that we're not getting punched hard enough in the face? You know what I mean? Metaphorically, but like literally too. I mean, maybe we should be getting hit a little harder with that magic stick.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because it's exciting to go, oh, I'm in the story. But it's also scary, because the ending of the story that we've been told is not, and then they figured it out and lived happily ever after. It is, They reject the fullness of the gospel, all except a few, right? Jacob comes through them like a lion, mowing them down, right? Cataclysm, Jerusalem descends from the sky, right? Like
Right.
I want to live in more boring times. I mean, I think you're right, Chad. It's really now is really interesting moment. A lot of interesting. By the way, I think one reason it's an interesting moment is because real things are happening and we're reaching real realizations. And I think at the same time, it is an age. I think the same energy that drives that or is related to that also is throwing up lots of charlatans and hucksters and pretenders and man, we got to be careful. So yes, exciting and also scary, right?
Yeah, I think when you say speaks of throwing up lots of charlatans and hucksters, I think that gets into the anxiety of our age and why people have fears about charismatic faith. Like I kind of brought up the last time I was on the program that it seems like we go through these cycles historically in which we have this outpouring of mysticism and gifts of the spirit and kind of the veil getting thinner, and it seems to pop up in all religious traditions. And then you get kind of this priest caste that emerges, and I think I've heard the term priestcraft used in my life. And what I think of that is kind of like these people that emerge, and we always think of them as with bad intentions, but sometimes it kind of seems like, you know, the charismatic gets out of control really fast. Like
I think bad intentions is a really misunderstood idea. Like, do you think Stalin had bad intentions? Do you think that Mao had bad intentions? Like, do you think Lucifer, do you think the idea of like, isn't the idea of the accuser that you think your intentions are better than God's?
Yeah. And I think sometimes these people can look, well, I'll take a contemporary example. Like in our tradition, we hear charismatic and we think of like, I don't know, Joseph Smith having a revelation to lift up the least among us and help the poor wayfaring man of grief or something like that. But the charismatic also is like those guys on TV that are claiming like, hey, you need to send me money to go to heaven. That's not in the Latter-day Saint tradition, but it's in the realm of the charismatic. And sometimes my reaction to that is, I want to shut this guy down because this is corrupt and he's taking advantage of old people. But eventually you get to this point where like there's a clamp down on all mysticism and you end up with kind of a dead faith. In like the evangelical world, they call them dead churches. And I think Joseph Smith grew up around a lot of dead churches. And the religion had to come back from the common people seeking it out again. And it seems like we go through these cycles historically all over the world.
Yeah, Father.
It's very interesting. So one thing I think that's going on right now is I feel like culturally we're very spiritually suppressed in a way. And what I mean by that is when I first started reading The Language of Adam, I saw you use a term that I thought only I had used, cultural Protestantism, where the LDS faith, especially like in Utah, they seem to reject a lot of these more mystical doctrines, right? Like they believe in the church because it's how they grew up. I'll give an example with me personally. So I'm in a group chat with a couple dozen people. They're sort of debating about if the church today is in apostasy or not. And I am defending the church by saying, look, I have literally had a vision from God, which has shown me things that I could not possibly have known, which has shown me things that were in scriptures that I had not read yet, where a messenger in that vision showed to me that the modern church is in trouble, but it is still true and it is not apostate. So I am defending the church from sort of these remnant type groups.
We have a crazy amount of access to data today that we didn't have before. Like the idea that we're in apostasy and we have all of the books is just, we have so much more capacity to use AI to read these things for what they actually said. Every member who can't read could be read to in their own language. They could be hearing it from like the level. Yeah, the level, but then you could also learn it and tell your friends. Like we could all meme the lesson. We don't have to be in apostasy. It's all up to each person, really.
But here's the point I was trying to make, is that so I'm putting up the best argument to defend the church, because you just got sort of these sort of generic mainstream Utah Mormons who are trying to argue against it, and they're doing a very terrible job defending the church. I come in and do a much better job saying I've received this revelation from God. And then they accuse me of being apostate for claiming that I've had a vision, saying, no, only President Nelson can receive a vision. Only he can receive revelation. You're apostate. You think you're better than the prophet. And I was just defending the prophet. So when I see that happening among the membership of Utah, it very much disgusts me and is terrible. It's like, that is the Gentiles rejecting the fullness of the gospel. Because
meanwhile, also you've got like, I was thinking earlier about like Century of the Self, like Edward Bernays. Like there's a plenty of secular magic, right? Like the same people that were practicing astrology moved into marketing and advertisement and learned how to convince you through your sexual urges and control over your desire for freedom or of realization of your own dreams, how to buy and sell whatever you want, Coca-Cola or a vote. And this is definitely in magic, right? It's magic because you put symbolism in front of people. They're using symbols and then they convince people how to move. This is priestcraft. This is all the time. We see people that are embellishing and empowering themselves, using other people's interest in themselves and influence. What is the point of having followers on YouTube? Is this literally ancient Rome? Do we have to have temples with like followers? We're not living in a place where secular society is so deviated from magic and spirituality. Everything we do is some sort of secular excuse for spiritual magic. A lot of it's super evil, super obviously evil. It's interesting when some people are trying to do something that's designed to benefit people. Then they're like, oh, that's superstitious, right?
Yeah.
This is the Master Mayhem principle, right? Is the great secret is that you can turn human life into gain. And that's the basis of much of modern life.
I think there's a risk we all run too, and like when I say when the institutions kind of get evolved to such a point that they want to clamp down on all mysticism to prevent the rise of charlatans, you can end up in apostasy that way too, because then you choke out the spirit. You're so afraid of kind of the Pentecostal guy that's like, just babbling and hey, give me all your money, that you end up choking out legitimate visionaries.
See, it's like what's it called? What's the Didache? So this is another book.
Yeah,
people ought to read like books they don't want you to read, I guess is the thing. Like they took that one out, but the Didache is really practical. It's like, here's a bunch of people trying to be Christians. We'll have a bunch of Christians and we'll see what happens. And they have people coming around, they're like, if this guy asks for money, don't give it to him. Like if he needs some food while he's in town, if he's a prophet, he stays for 3 days. If he's a prophet and fish are only good for 3 days. Like the Didache, it's too good, We don't need to worry about this idea of priestcraft. I think priestcraft is like kind of defeated by the idea, honestly, of tithing in general, right? Because you're like, okay, well, you don't need any more than you need realistically, and like you should be focused on that. Which is also like the idea of exaltation should be that you're able to build wealth and build, like, money can be printed. Like you can get money which is worth hours of your labor, but hours can't be printed. You can't just can live forever any other way. So you have to be very careful about what you're trading your life for in terms of money. And this is like the way that they've built the system. You're just saying, okay, I'll die for something other than I believe in.
So literally, our U.S. regulatory economic system is built so that everything is easy for you if you will accept to be a wage slave for a big corporation. Your taxes get very easy. You don't have to worry about the regulatory stuff, right? Insurance is covered for you. Retirement, it's all easy. God help you if you want to be self-employed. Like, it becomes nightmarishly complicated very fast, right? We literally, and I don't think we have to assume intentionality, because there's lots of incremental bad decisions got us here. We push people to where, look, if you don't want to fight a constant fight on everything, you just go take a job from Boeing or from John Deere, right? And that's and that's what we all do. I read a thing, I think it was in 2014, And I think it was looking. I think the comparison was between data of 2014 and 1914. Look back 1 century. So I may have the years up, but it's about this, and it asked the question: how many? But looking at the or let's see, it must have been no, it was using survey data, so it must have been like maybe it was 2020 versus 1920 or something. So it said how many Americans in the two periods were employed in family-owned businesses. And in 1920, it was like 85%.
Yeah.
And it's like completely flipped. Now it's like 15. All right. We went from being, this was like the French rap on the English. They were a nation of shopkeepers, a bunch of small, petty bourgeoisie, small business owners. That's who we were 100 years ago. No longer. Right.
Well, and then it's becoming increasingly rare for there to be direct ownership over businesses, like direct family ownership and things like that.
Yes. It's all owned by these big funds, which are controlled. This is part of like, man, okay, we're going into like Dave paranoid politics. This is part of the fundamental corruption of the white collar class.
I swear to God, it's related. I really do. Like the idea that people have a harder time dealing with the idea that there's good out there, but I think if you can help them see that there's evil using wickedness, yeah, like people can
see the alternative.
It's really like they're like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. Like there's someone is trying to use like blood magic to like hurt people and be immortal. Maybe that means that there is somebody good out there. Better be someone good if that's happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I had a friend who was an atheist, and he said he had to believe in the devil before he came to believe in God.
All right. See, there you go.
Well, that's actually very interesting that you say that. So, I talked about this when I'm on the Conversion to Christ channel, but that's actually one thing that made me think that there could be a God, is like literally researching into conspiracy theories, finding out, oh, the CIA literally has all these documents about astral projection and communicating with spirits and stuff. Supernatural stuff is real. And then I came to this conclusion, like, the devil is real, and so God must be real, and I really had to humble myself and like seek God and realize, oh, God is real, right? So
it's pretty crazy how like all of the lower frequencies of your voice have been removed except for like every few seconds. You get like a Ferris Bueller noise, but either way,
you're clear. You're audible.
That was like the clearest you've ever been. So I don't know. Yeah.
I think what got me getting into kind of conspiratorial thinking, the thing that got me, because, I kind of came of age in the late 2000s, early 2010s, when there was always like the fundamentalist Christian versus like the Richard Dawkins atheist debates all over YouTube. When I kind of hit the wall of realizing that was such an obvious psyop, I don't know if it was like a legitimate psyop, like it was planned out, but it hit that way. To divide the population into these false camps of religion versus science, and it was a very caricatured view of religion versus science, and then kind of realizing both sides sort of supported the American establishment's economic and foreign policy. We could get into that if you want. I don't necessarily want to go down that road, but realizing that a lot of the personalities on both sides believed in the exact same thing politically, and you could go the religious route or the atheist route and end up with the exact same economic political views. Yeah, I
really do believe that the material and the spiritual are a lot closer related than people realize. It's not that you close your eyes in a chaos storm and it's Eden, it's more that you might be able to see the subtleties of how things are connected more and more, and realize that if you make something beautiful in the material world, that it actually helps the spiritual world, like vice versa as well. And so we're constantly asked to, pretend away. Guys, I think this is like a feudalistic idea from the Crusades. Hey, you're starving. Don't worry. When you get to heaven, there'll be food. But really, it's not about that. It's like building the bridge between material and celestial here, right? Trying to make this as close as possible.
So you're saying that we need to awake and remember, right?
Yeah, but also like we need to like give. So I see life as being a really important thing. Making gardens and growing food for kids, having many kids, these kinds of things are obvious. There's something out there, it looks like, that eats death, like, or eats life and is a death like itself, like loves the idea of death and is destructing the human spirit. And I think making more spirit, making more life, making more children, making more plants. I seriously think that's like a bigger deal than it sounds. It sounds like I'm talking about Captain Planet stuff, but
No. So let me tell you about another book we're publishing, probably coming out in pre-order in October, should be out in November, I think, by a woman named Megan Farner, and the book's titled "Consider Yourself as Eve." And what it really is it's a manual for spiritual personal development, specifically for women, potentially of interest to any man who was interested in knowing what women think. I don't know what you
particularly us weird West Coast guys. I'll read it. Yeah,
I'm interested in what women think.
that could be useful,
There are
guys. Like you might
incentives.
want to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
She says basically this exact thing, Andreas. Like her reading of the enmity placed by God between the serpent and Eve and Eve's seed is that, and there's a traditional reading of that it's about Christ, and she says, well, yes. Again, there's a traditional Christian reading of it, right? Which to say, but she says she argues it's also about reproduction. It's about the fundamental and sort of, it's a woman-centric book. So this fundamental womanly act, she would say, ordinance, womanly sacrament of bringing life into the world is part of defeating Satan, right? So consider yourself as Eve. That's a fantastic book coming out in October, November from us.
That sounds awesome. I'll definitely check that out. I mean,
Well,
go ahead, but I was going to ask real quick, like the idea of life in general versus life and death. Like, do you see it as, I mean, because like people talk about this idea of like machinery and AI. Like, do you see death or sustained non-life as something that's like at war with life itself at all?
Yeah, I think life, light and life. That's what it's the tree of light and life, right? The straight and narrow gate leadeth to life. Life is what it's all about.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think powers that turn life into money or seek to destroy life for the convenience of sex, right? Or other things that sell life down the river for things that are immeasurably cheaper are fundamentally satanic.
Absolutely. I think that if people were to use that as a metric for whether or not something was good or bad, that would be a really great way. Like, are you furthering life, or are you wasting the little life that you have on sacrificing it for something less important? That's so real.
I don't necessarily agree with him on everything, but there was a really good episode of Ward Radio way back when that had Jacob Hansen on it when he talked about we live in a death cult. And I
mean, same. I would actually agree with that entire sentiment. That's exactly
I agree.
right.
I everything, but like I agree with them on that. And when I was kind of going back to that, when I was saying that like both sides of that, like false kind of fundy versus I love science atheist thing, is both sides kind of end up supporting the death cult if you think about it a little bit. Because you get into certain strains of fundamentalist Christianity, the way they go with their eschatology. I had a friend who grew up in one of those doomsday evangelical churches, and he remembers his pastor kind of discouraging childbirth because it's all about to end anyway. We're about to hit the rapture, and this war in the Middle East is inevitable, and we kind of want it to happen. And then you get to some of these,
where's that unblemished calf? Bring him out. Check under your seat. Under your seat.
He's kind of, like I said, the Reddit I love science atheist crowd, and a lot of them, like they like Christopher Hitchens and those guys, they supported these wars over there too. Like both sides lend themselves to that because one side sees itself as like modernity, and we're going to come over there and really stick it to these crazy backward people in the Middle East, and the other side
there's definitely like a kind of, I don't know, like a Shivite idea of creation destruction, and so reincarnation. And so even the idea that if you killed everybody, something new would emerge. I think that's the alternative That's the old. I don't know. I'm not completely sure if I want to call that evil, but it feels like the idea that you want to destroy everything and have it figure itself out is kind of evil, right? Like that kind of seems evil to me.
Well, I do think
Oh, go on.
that the evil we're against, it's inevitable and it's been prophesied. And it's clearly in the Book of Mormon and the Book of Revelations. And the sad thing is that the majority of people will not awaken to these things. That is how the story is written. That's what happens. But to those of us that understand, we do have the solution, right?
That was hilarious. What was the solution? Oh, wait, was the solution the endowment? Was that what he's trying to say? Let's read through his memoirs. He had some messages here. Most people don't understand that the endowment gives us spiritual protection because it expects those of us who are endowed to experience spiritual things, visions, angels, and demons. The transfiguration, the endowment, the temple, it's all the same. Though it's interesting because the Navajo guy we reacted to is very clearly describing the endowment in their lodges. Yeah, I think that the idea that the endowment is completely lost doesn't make sense. Is the kind of the point here. Like, I think the win-win and is going to bother people, but it's that even though our church isn't perfect, right? Like there is this, because it exists in the world, it exists everywhere, or it can exist. There are probably people that have it elsewhere because it's God's way.
Well, let me offer a perspective. I think this is consistent with what you're saying. Maybe this is in fact a different way to restate what you're saying.
Please, yeah. I don't know if I liked how I said it.
No, I liked it, but I think of myself as ecumenical, but in a very strange way. Okay, because I realize I'm an ecumenical Mormon. Everyone else is like, I don't want to be ecumenical with Mormons. You guys,
right? Oh my gosh.
Okay, I get it, right? But here's what I think the situation really is. So Alma says in a passage, the debate with the Ammonites that reeks with temple from start to finish. I talk about this in the book. Okay, it's all about the mysteries. And he says these things were had from the beginning. And if that's true, what we should expect is to find them everywhere, right? And not identical, because human beings are we do everything through a glass darkly, right? We pass things down with our biases and imperfectly and our misunderstandings. Absolutely. And so what we should expect to see is 500, 1,000 different versions that if you put them side by side, you go, man, there's something in common here.
The
right?
Substance.
I can see differences, but there is a great human enterprise that whether you like it or not, we're all engaged in it. And whether we realize it or not, all of our cultures maybe, right? But certainly many of them have some science in them, some knowledge about the enterprise and about how to go about it, right? And the LDS endowment is a version of that. I think Mass is a version. So I think a Catholic could read in the language of Adam and go, this is weird. This is like a history of the Mass in the Book of Mormon.
I, as someone raised Catholic, have seen a lot of that in the first 4 or 5 chapters so far, which is fascinating, of course.
As you like coming out of being Community of Christ and being a Mason, I'm all for ecumenicism. So
I think that the Latter-day Saint tradition could. I'm not saying it doesn't, but I feel like it could emphasize the Eucharist a bit. The way that the Jesuits and the way being raised, with the Ignatian method, like the way the Eucharist is emphasized, I think is very important. I'm always concerned with Pauline interpretations of the Eucharist, but I think that Christ's last thing he does before he dies, like, look, this is something I want you to remember. So obviously the Eucharist is very important, right? Yeah. And so we see it even with the hidden Christians in Japan. Centuries later, even though they've been genocided and are not allowed to practice their religion, what is the one thing they're still doing?
The thing.
They're doing the Eucharist. So there's something to the Eucharist. I highly agree. Bikini Truther, we love you. Glad you're here.
these conversations with mainstream Christians, and they'll ask you if you believe in like transubstantiation, or do you believe in real presence, or this or that. And I always go back to the prayer we use, that that we might have His Spirit to be with us. And I don't know if that means we believe in real presence. I don't quite understand that terminology, but I do believe that when you partake in the sacrament.
I've had some weird experiences with that, actually. So, like, there's a guy in the Thoughtful Saints or Thoughtful Faith, whatever group that Jacob Hansen has, and he's been converting to Catholicism. And I was like, bro, you're like going the wrong way, turn around, But he's like, what do you think about like transubstantiation? And I'm like, well, I've had some experiences with that. It's like, wanted to know all about it. Well, like one of the weirdest ones was I was in Spain at the tomb of what's his name? The dictator of Spain, Franco. Sorry, it was at Franco's tomb. And there's a giant cave, and there's these weird statues that are 30 foot tall of women with cloaks holding swords. And you go into the cave, and like there's all these other Catholic boys, and I can speak Spanish and smile, and so I go with them. And then they're all in the process of becoming either SSPX or something like it, which is like a Vatican I style Catholicism, but they still do things in Latin. And my Latin's like, okay, so I can do the prayers. So I'm sitting with them, and they do the Eucharist. And the Eucharist, they turn off the light. Like there's not a lot of lights. There's some candles in there. They blow out the candles for the transubstantiation thing. And it tastes like blood. Like I'm on my knees on the buried Franco, you know what I mean? And like, this is how they do it. Like your tongue's out. And they put it in your mouth, and it tastes like blood, and the crunch to the flesh is so like, this is a Halloween 90s horror house. It's so real. I don't know. And so to me, this is like the most terrifying, weirdest thing that makes me start thinking like, what the heck is the deal with the sacrifice of the Lord? Like, why would you want that instead of the life of the Lord? All this stuff starts kind of confusing me. But also what this guy's like, oh, wow, I should become a Catholic. So I don't know, because people love the Catholics for transubstantiation. They love it for all of the, the transubstantiation miracles. People love having that happen. And that seems to be a major, like that happens a lot with Catholics. I've seen some weird things in Peru also, but I just don't think that it's necessarily a good thing. Like, I'm not sure I really want to be eating Yeshua, you know what I mean? Saying like, I don't know if that's really. I honestly think drinking pure water with Yeshua, or even just getting drunk with him, probably would be more what he would be into than me drinking his blood.
I actually had an interesting experience. So it was after I went into the temple for the first time. I was fasting for like 4 days, and then afterwards, at home, I was blessing the sacrament for myself, and I got grape juice and I got flatbread. And interestingly enough, I was fasting for like 2 days or something, I forget. When I put it into my mouth, it was tingly. Like it made my body feel tingly. Like there was a weird, like my tongue was being electrocuted almost. So it almost felt like what I think is that the actual presence is like a spiritual presence, like the Lord's essence.
Right. And I think that that's the difference, is we're not supposed to be eating Jesus, but like maybe eating with Jesus, which is not that like crazy. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't know. What do you think about that, Dave? Are we supposed to eat Jesus or eat with Jesus?
It's, the Sermon on the Mount actually covers this, which I think is the great liturgical temple outline that Matthew gives us in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, because you are taught 2 orders of prayer in Matthew 6. The first is individually, how do you pray in your closet? You pray privately. And then you're taught a group order prayer. And you can see this in the translation, at least in the King James, which accurately is tracking the Greek. It goes from thou, when thou prayest, you one guy, to when ye pray, which is all y'all, if you're from south of the Mason-Dixon line, right? When all y'all pray like this. And then it's the Lord's Prayer. And the Lord's Prayer is, give us this day our daily bread. There's a long conversation there. Terrible translation. That is not the daily bread. what that says is, and this is actually, I thought it was an original idea to me, and then I found it in a, I forget what it's called. They have this book that's like published by the Vatican. It goes through the New Testament in order for every single word. It breaks down each word and analyzes it and has references. It's this fat book. It's like this word in this verse. Here's what it means. I forget what it's called. I love it. And they noticed the same thing. They made the same argument I did. They said this is the daily bread is not a reference to daily bread. It is it is the host. Give us this day the bread that the Lord is in. And we can talk about the Greek, totally do it if you want, but it is the epiousios bread, the bread that the existent one is upon. It's not daily. So you pray for that. That's the prayer. You're in the second room of this journey, Matthew chapter 6. And you're led in a group prayer and you pray for your daily bread. And then what happens? Well, in the end of Matthew 6, the Lord appears, the Lord who appears to be called righteousness, that is to say, he's also called Melchizedek, and he feeds you a feast of his flesh and blood, which is exactly right, because at the beginning of Matthew 5, one of the beatitude promises is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Right. Filled with what? The flesh and blood of Melchizedek, which is the Son of God as king. Okay, so Melchizedek, the son, comes down. You have a feast of his own flesh and blood, right? So now, is that transubstantiation? Man, I don't know. Is it a symbol? I don't know. But I think it's very old. And to your point, Andreas, I think Jesus...
talking about someone older than himself, even, or like not the man side. Yeah,
I think it is older than the mortal man Jesus. Again, this is
from
stuff
that perspective
about in the language of Adam, okay? But in Luke 22, when he says, eat this in remembrance of me, the Greek is, he says, eat this, it is an anamnesis, okay? It is a remembrance of me, all right? Now, this is in the upper room. So this is a 3-part ascent sequence. You go from Jerusalem up into the upper room where you have this feast, and then they ascend again to the Mount of Olives, the place where the sacred trees are. Okay. Well, it turns out there is a feast in the Old Testament where Aaron and his sons also eat bread, and it is in the middle room of the temple. It's described in, no, I'm going to forget the chapter. Is it Numbers 20? No, not Numbers. It's probably Leviticus 24. I'll find it. It's the showbread, whatever the chapter is where the showbread is in, and the Greek version, so it's said to be a zikaron, which is a memorial or a remembrance. And the Greek it's an anamnesis. Yeah, there it is. So Jesus seems to be referring to this exact same thing, right? He's not inventing a new rite. He's teaching a new meaning of something that existed, or he's reminding people of something that was before that perhaps they had forgotten, which there always was a priestly ascent into the temple where you ate bread as a remembrance of what? Of the God who was the bread, right? This is John chapter 6. Jesus, I am the bread, right? So, I don't think Jesus was, I think much less than Jesus is giving new things. That's not Jesus's role. Jesus came as the Son of God to offer the great sacrifice. Okay. He wasn't here to teach new doctrine. He was here to remind you of old doctrine that many of you have forgotten, and to be the great sacrifice that the old doctrine was always telling you was going to come.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because like that passage we were talking about earlier, that's clearly a temple passage, right? You have the imagery of the wife and wisdom and being anointed in the temple and clothed in garments of glory, just like in the book of Enoch. There's that imagery of them drinking bread and eating wine in the temple, right? And for us, that would be the terrestrial room, which the terrestrial room is supposed to represent Jesus Christ, right? Like that's his room on the way to the Father. So that's very interesting. Though, before I cut out, what I was trying to say is that to those of us who understand the things that are going on in the world, we will need to not only just know the ordinances in a legalistic, Deuteronomist sort of way, where they remember the ordinances of the rituals, but they don't understand the meaning. But to understand the meaning and to achieve the fullness of the Melchizedek priesthood and the true endowment of power, that in the coming days we will need an endowment of power.
Hmm. I think going back to the question of the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, it probably is going to come down to your view of the nature of the atonement when you're getting into the question of transubstantiation. So, like in my church tradition, we have the empty cross for the exact same reason the LDS have the statues of the risen Jesus, because we emphasize the resurrection as opposed to the death fiction. And it seems like what might be going on in terms of, kind of emphasizing the host as a vessel for the Spirit of God, as opposed to something that literally transforms into the body and the blood of God. It might be tied into how you see the atonement. Uh, that was a thought I had. And then another area I kind of wanted to ask about is, what do you guys think of this notion that the upper room at Pentecost took place in the temple, or was a kind of a temple experience? Because, like, as I said, like in our tradition, we always kind of harken back to Kirtland and the outpouring of the gifts of the Spirit. And Kirtland is kind of a Pentecost for the Latter-day Saint movement. And that was at one point a kind of the place where our understanding of the temple was anchored before other things came out during the Nauvoo period. What do you think of the connection between the idea of the upper room and temple work? I'm very curious about that, because I know in the Cutlerite tradition, they call the endowment the upper room work. They actually call it that, or something to that effect. I'm curious about that.
So I totally think it is.
Mm-hmm.
I totally think it is. I think the temple is everything. I think this is true for the New Testament too, in ways that we conventionally don't think about. I'm reading this commentary on Revelation. Okay, I'm going to throw some Bible scholar under the bus now. I can't remember his name, but it's the Anchor Bible Dictionary Commentary on Revelation. And you know how one of the church leaders in like chapter 2 was warned, "Oh, you're lukewarm, neither hot or cold. I'm going to spit you out of my mouth." Right? Like, ironically, that's this commentary. It is lukewarm. It's like, I don't have a position. I'm just going to tell you everyone else's position. It's the most boring commentary on Revelation ever. But one of the things that he does that every time I see it, I laugh. Okay. He cannot take seriously the idea that the Christians of circa 90 AD would care anything about the temple. So every time the temple comes up, he's trying to explain how it's a metaphor for something else. Well, the whole thing is set in the temple from start to finish. The whole thing is a vision in the temple. And so you have to go, well, these guys don't care about the temple. And in fact, they for 60 years have said, well, that's gone and done. But why, what is the logic
It's
of
a
this
metaphor. Yeah,
if it's a metaphor in somebody else's religion, you're going to use a metaphor in somebody else's religion to explain key things to me. It's so idiotic, right? Like, it's manifestly obvious from reading the book of Revelation that whoever the audience was, they had ideas about the temple and it mattered to them.
Yeah, immediately. If you're 6 years old and you're like, wait, New Jerusalem is like this many cubits, and it's a gold cube, you're like, wait a second.
It's a
this
cube.
Is not...
There's the throne of God. This is the temple. These guys cared about the temple. It meant things to them. Right. And
clearly.
And yeah, I think imagining the temple out. Now
it has all the same stones. Revelation is showing all this. Yeah, I mean, every little bit.
The 7 torches are clearly the menorah, right? It's all temple stuff,
which is crazy. When I haven't done that yet. I haven't analyzed Revelation looking at the menorah as the family of Elohim, like the pantheon of Elohim. Which really, I'm going to do that this weekend. Thank you.
I have always been very curious about because I've always thought of like the saints clothed in white in Revelation as being just people that achieve the celestial glory. But I have always been very curious as to how LDS people see that, considering they dress in white in their temples. I've always been curious as to how they saw those figures in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, but I think
clearly time traveling is all about Mormonism. We all know that, right?
Yeah. So here's my experience, Professor, with This is not my experience. Here's I think an important thing you have to sort of take to any discussion of the temple with you. Okay, you have to embrace the power of and. You have to look at things and go, like if you say, well, this symbol means that, and you get fixated on one thing, like you're going to miss stuff because there are so many symbols. Okay, like there are so many symbols. Sorry, what I'm going to say is there are so many meanings to any symbol. Okay, they are all multivalent, and there is, and this is in the language of Adam. I talk about this. There are multiple narratives, so you are proceeding through multiple myth stories at the same time, and you're being exposed to multiple layers of meaning. So, why am I saying this? Do I think that people who are dressed in white are being dressed are initiates who are changing their clothing to change their ontological status? Absolutely, I do. Do I think that also they are people who are seen to be in heaven, dead, angelic? Yep, absolutely, right? Embrace the power of and. Are there possibly other things that I'm not seeing there too? Yep, absolutely. Right. This is the temple. Like it is layer upon layer upon layer.
It's interesting, like the Hmong Chinese like associate white with death, right? And so there's also the idea of the veil, right? I mean, the veil in general, this idea of being a world bridger. Like death is even a weird term because a lot of cultures don't use the word birth or death. They use like this world bridging term, which is kind of interesting for both.
Well, it kind of ties into this. There's a quote I always really like that kind of talked about man as a bridge between the physical and the spiritual world. And I always see those as kind of on a continuum anyway. I'm not a dualist, but it's interesting to me kind of because I've always been kind of taught as a Mason to think of myself as a temple for the Spirit of God. So it's interesting to
I think that also comes from the idea though of not having the temple. So you're like, well, now you are the temple until there is a temple.
That's probably true. I'm not going to deny that. So,
but I think it's also that is one of the important things. The microcosm and the macrocosm correspond.
Yeah,
and even to so
nice
look,
Albert Pike quote, by the way.
Yeah. By the way, so one of the sort of basic meanings of the temple, and this has to do with the Book of Mormon's obsession over seed, okay, is the temple is a birth canal. You enter it as seed. You pass through the straight and narrow gate into the cosmic womb in the presence of the mother, and then you were born as an angelic being. And by the way, here's another meaning to like the white clothing, swaddling clothes, right? You're a new birth. By the way, here's another meaning. You're one of the stars because angels are stars. And
what's interesting is it's how all of these sacramental acts kind of rhyme with each other. Because a lot of this, I was taught about my baptism as an RLDS church member. It's so interesting how all of these kind of rhyme with each other. And I've heard Catholics say that about their confirmation experience because they dress in white when they're confirmed.
100%.
I don't know. I've heard that. They wear special clothing. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. 100%. I absolutely think that the confirmation probably genetically, historically relates to the Nephite expulsion from and return to Eden. I think that baptism is the exoteric, the external sign, part of the preparation, right? It is, Paul says it's a death and resurrection. I think that's true. I think inside the temple, in the second room, I think this is my reconstruction of it. You can read it in the language of Adam. You read this in Matthew 5, you're stripped down, you're beaten in the cheeks, okay? I think this is you becoming mortal, being taught your mortality. Satan puts chains on you. I think you've come fasting. You move forward into the second room, and I think there is some kind of a simulated death. Now, in the contemporary LDS endowment in my lifetime, what that looks like is close your eyes, now open your eyes. And people don't realize that they're simulating a death because it's so small.
Oh yeah, it's kind of like when you're baptized and you go under, it's like the watery grave and you rise up out of it again,
Right. But I think it's possible that Nephi's experience was that you were led through physical exertions. You were fasting, you were sweating, the air was thick with incense. You were led through physical exertions until you passed out. and then you were awakened and made to rise as the veil was parting, and the Son of God as King, Melchizedek, was descending to invite you to the feast, right? So I think that was the esoteric death and resurrection, and the rhyme, the exoteric, the sort of child's version, right? New converts version, the catechumens teaching a version, was baptism, to get you ready for the more intense thing that you're going to do, where they're remaking you as in your new angelic life.
And that's pretty interesting, because that definitely has resonance all over the world of that kind of an approach. That's
There's
very
that scene with Keanu Reeves and Constantine where he goes to the midnight chair, right? Basically. And like he
Awesome.
sees that. I think that's kind of the idea, though, realistically, that you kind of like leave this realm and die and are born again. And that's what scares me when like the Protestants talk about born again. Like, do you guys really like, are you holding them down? Like, what do you mean by that? Because it seems kind of scary. Again, like maybe you have to, though.
And well, but that is what's described in the Book of Mormon, right? The book,
Right.
like the Ammon experience,
It's hardcore.
What the king says to Aaron is, I want to be born again. I want to have hope. Okay. The spiritual gift of hope is being born again. And hope is specifically the hope that you too can enter the kingdom of God and sit down with the fathers to go no more out. What happens is Ammon teaches him about the creation, Adam, the fall, redemption. He appears to lead him through some exercises. There's a cry for mercy. The king passes out.
Yeah.
Right. And when he comes to, what does that mean? He has been born again. That is, I think the experience was something like, right. This is why I don't think you've got to this part.
What's that movie called with like with the heart stoppers, right? With the,
yeah. Way back, so you could they induced near death experiences. Flatliners. Is that what
Flatliners? That's what it's like.
You're
Oh my
talking about,
gosh.
like,
Latter-day
1980s.
Flatliners is a really terrifying idea, though. I feel
Latter-day-
like it's the next level sci-fi I've never heard. Like Alma Flatliner.
What's pretty interesting is when you talk about the cry for mercy.
Yeah.
I know that this happened in the Latter-day Saint tradition, and it's also kind of happened in the broader Protestant tradition that practiced adult baptism. The idea of your confession of faith.
Oh yeah.
Used to necessarily be an interview with a pastor or a bishop or something like that. It was a public confession of faith, a cry for mercy in front of the congregation, sort of
Super
that
interesting.
you acknowledge that you're a sinner, and it's dramatized. Like you go to Southern Baptist churches, people get on stage and cry and this and that. I don't know if it was ever to that extent in our tradition or the broader American Protestant tradition at that time, but that was thought of as what a confession of faith was at one point, was to publicly cry out for mercy in front of the congregation.
Have you seen?
I think there is. I've like sort of opened this door, right? Or I've been present at this opening, this small opening of this door. But I think someday someone's going to write a book on the scope of the Golden Bough. It's going to be like a big multi-volume book, and all
that's
of this
David
stuff.
Plate's whole thing. Yeah, they're doing that right now. You
And
should get involved with it. Get involved with David Plate.
And they're going to be like, okay, in the Hindu tradition, here is all this stuff, and in the among the Zoroastrians, and in the Jewish community at Cochin in India, we found this, right? Like someday there's going to be just a hella interesting book.
So David Plate and Paranoid American, I don't know if you're saying that just because but they're in the process of doing the Golden Bough thing. It started out that they wanted to do something for Kubrick because Kubrick's favorite book was the Golden Bough, and he used to send it to people before he promised they'd have to read it before they worked on a project with him. And then just
the one volume abridgment though, right? Not like the 12 volume.
No, I think he'd send like 12 volumes. This is Stanley Kubrick we're talking about.
You must read 6,000 pages.
Yeah, and they're like, no, like I just want to work on a movie. Like this is the movie. This is your life. This is everything. This is the Golden Bough. So yeah, that's happening. I don't know, but I don't know the answer to like what the universe is. There's like have you seen that movie Waking Life? You know what I'm talking about?
I don't think I have.
I recommend it. It's a cool movie. It's all like rotoscope, like you mentioned, through a scanner darkly, kind of through glass darkly. Is that style? In this movie, a dude is dying, I guess, basically going through his waking life REM state, and he meets a bunch of people. This guy's telling him that Philip K. Dick's novels are telling him that the Bible is really, that everything is happening really in 90 AD. Like right now, you and me are living in 90 AD, and the devil's just got this illusion on you to make you feel like it's the year 2000, whatever, so that you'll just sort of go with the magic, go with the fact that you're talking to people in other places, and all these illusions and vexations of spirit are happening, and that you will just kind of forget the temple and you'll forget God, right? I think that's kind of interesting that
That's a cool idea.
I feel like that might be, in a sense, what's happening to us. I don't know.
That's a cool idea. So, okay, I gotta say one last thing because I don't know. It's
Yeah.
2 hours. You may be about to shut us down.
I might.
So, look, this is why. Okay, this is why. I was excited when I put all this together. All of this stuff is why when Nephi tells us that he was initiated, which is in 1 Nephi 2:16, and he says, I was exceedingly young, and he says, but I had great desires to know the mysteries of God, and he says, being large in stature, I called upon the Lord, and he appeared to me. Okay, this is Nephi telling us when he was initiated into the mysteries of God. Now, why is it relevant that he says, I was exceedingly young, nevertheless I was a large in stature? What he is saying is this was a physically rigorous experience. There was no close your eyes, open your eyes. You are now
Right.
awake. You got hit in the face. You carried pains. You were fasting. They made you unconscious so you could have a rebirth and a resurrection experience. And he's saying, I was very young, but I was a big kid. So they knew I could take the beating, and I really wanted it.
Wow.
And so they went ahead and initiated me. That's what 1 Nephi 2:16 means.
That's so hardcore. All right, everybody, make sure you go to Dave Butler's website, check out his book. Language of Adam is my favorite, but he's got all kinds of sci-fi. I'm gonna have to get deep into that soon because you know how I am about sci-fi. I love sci-fi. He also does adventure stories for kids. A lot of you have kids. Buy them some awesome sci-fi. The Clockwork Charlie, Kidnap Plot. That looks pretty sweet, actually.
It's fun. It's good stuff.
All right, man. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time. Peace out.